I'm your host, named bin Mohammed Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel, The Major Universe. Decades ago, I think it was the first time when a man, morally corrupt, a womanizer, 16 women came against him. Man never revealed his income tax. He was not a politician. He talked ugly about women. He talked about, touching pussy and, in the bus when he was going with somebody, a youngster, Bobby. And, this is a kind of a man, the slum, the filth, the dirt, how low, in culture, in habit, in character one has to go to be a leader. Why on earth this man who has, cheated, deceived, and did all kinds of sins which are present, the devil would do on this earth. And Republicans nominated him against all the odds, but there were many able people, there were many noble people, there were many tried horses, there were people who had a meticulous career, political career, and they are above board. None of those, all those who debated him, none of those were nominated, and none of them became a candidate. In 2016, the curse on the United States started. And now this curse has continued, and when you have elected the same person for the second time, in spite of the fact that he attacked, the first time the Capitol was attacked, the windows were broken, and both the Speaker and the Vice President had to run for their life. Everybody witnessed that, and then even the Pentagon, if the army chief refused to say that I am not going to protect you, I am here to protect the Constitution, I took the oath on that. And he kept that bitterness, he kept that, hate for him till now, and what he has done by dismissing in the second term, what he has done with the tariff trade, what he has done to the European, what he has done to Chinese, to Russians, to Indians, to Ukrainian, insult after insult, and he doesn't give a damn to what happens to at the grocery stores, what the prices were before this tariff war, and what the prices went up more than 40%, and because it wasn't going through his pocket. He had not seen poverty. His table was always laden with all kinds of dishes and dinners, so he has never starved. He had never stood in the queue in the homeless and the chicken, the kitchen soups. Now this devil is now this last, I think, going to be the President of the United States of America. This was myself also, I think, hinted about this years ago, that this will make the way this man has polarized the nation, the way when they've got what the white, from the rural area supremacists against the African Americans, the Latin Americans, Muslims. First he banned all the Muslims countries and took a U-turn back. Then you can see what he did in 2016. He is just repeating in slow motion the same thing again and again, and he is not ashamed that he is taking U-turn. And I'm amazed about the judicial system of that nobody is impeaching him, nobody is stopping him, and history is repeating itself again and again. Now it has been prophesied that the year 2026, which is the next year, will be the last President of the United States is going to see as a United States of America with 52 states. He may be a president for the third term for 10 or 20 or maybe 25 poor states, but obviously he is not going to have 98% of the GDP created by those states like California, like Texas, like New York. They are never going to be part with it, and I am just presenting you two videos, one by a Christian and the other by an American, and you see for yourself what is they are saying, and if you agree with that, please subscribe and to see more like that.
Its greatest test. He spoke of a leader who would emerge during a time of tremendous division, a figure who would polarize the nation like never before. He described economic upheaval, natural disasters, and a moment when the very soul of America would hang in the balance. Sound familiar? But Cayce went further. He didn't just predict general chaos. He outlined a specific sequence of events that would unfold in the mid-2020s. And when you line up his readings with current events, the parallels are absolutely chilling. He spoke of a return, a second coming of a controversial figure. He mentioned the year 2026, specifically in connection with what he called a great reckoning for America. And he described a scenario that matches, almost point by point, what many analysts are now predicting for Donald Trump's second term. Let's be clear about something. Edgar Cayce never mentioned Donald Trump by name. How could he? Trump wasn't born until 1946, a year after Cayce died. But Cayce described archetypes, patterns, and cycles. He spoke about America's karma, about lessons the nation would need to learn. And he detailed a specific type of leader who would emerge during America's darkest hour. A builder, he called him. Someone connected to towers and gold. Someone who would promise to restore greatness, but who would face an unprecedented challenge in the process. The reading that catches everyone's attention is number 3976-26. In this reading from 1944, Cayce was asked about America's future. He spoke about upheavals that would come, about changes in the political system, about a time when Americans would question everything they once believed. He said that in the 2020s, there would be a shifting of the poles, and while many interpret this literally as geological pole shifts, Cayce researchers now believe he was also speaking metaphorically about political poles, about the extreme polarization that would tear at the fabric of American society. But here's the specific part that makes people's jaws drop. In this same reading, Cayce described a period around 2026 when a leader who had been celebrated and then rejected would face his ultimate test. He spoke of towers falling, not just physical towers, but towers of power, towers of influence. He described a scenario where this leader would be given a second chance, a return to position, but that this return would not bring the peace and prosperity the leader promised. Instead, it would trigger the very crisis it was meant to prevent. Think about Trump's history with towers. Trump Tower in New York. His entire brand built on the symbolism of reaching toward the sky, of gold-plated excess, of building monuments to success. Cayce's symbolism of towers and gold appearing in readings about America's future leader is impossible to ignore. But it goes deeper than symbolism. Cayce spoke about timing. He used astrological cycles in his readings, and he noted that certain planetary alignments would mark turning points for nations and leaders. Researchers have analyzed these cycles, and several major astrological events converge in 2026. Specifically, a rare alignment that Cayce associated with the fall of leaders who overreach. This alignment happens in late 2026, and according to Cayce's framework, it marks a point of no return. Now let's talk about what Cayce actually predicted would happen. According to his readings, this controversial leader would return to power, but his second period in office would be marked by three major crises that happen in rapid succession. First, an economic event that shakes global markets. Cayce described it as a crumbling of false foundations, a moment when systems built on debt and speculation would collapse. He said this would happen suddenly, catching everyone off guard, and that it would be triggered by something connected to international trade and alliances breaking down. Does this sound relevant right now? With Trump's promises to implement massive tariffs, to renegotiate international agreements, to shake up the global economic order? Cayce said the leader's own policies would inadvertently trigger the crisis he claimed he would prevent. And in 2026, according to the reading, this economic shockwave would hit with full force. The second crisis Cayce described was environmental. He spoke of natural disasters increasing in frequency and intensity during this period. Specifically, he mentioned the East Coast of America facing water-related catastrophes. Now, Cayce was famous for his predictions about Earth changes, and while some of his timelines have been debated, the pattern is undeniable. He said that human actions, particularly actions by leaders who ignore environmental warnings, would accelerate these natural responses. In 2026, he saw flooding, extreme weather, and what he called the sea, claiming what man had built. Think about Trump's environmental policies, his position on climate change, his focus on deregulation. Whether you agree with these policies or not, Cayce's reading suggests that in 2026, the consequences of ignoring environmental warnings would manifest in dramatic and undeniable ways, and he specifically connected this to the leadership in place at that time. But the third crisis is the most shocking. Cayce spoke of a constitutional crisis, a moment when the very foundations of American democracy would be questioned. He described a scenario where the leader would refuse to accept limitations on his power, where institutions would clash, and where the American people would be forced to choose between security and freedom. He used the phrase civil strife repeatedly in his readings about this period. Here's where it gets really unsettling. Cayce described a specific event that would serve as a trigger point. He called it the judgment of the builders, a moment when those who had built their fortunes and power on questionable foundations would face legal and public reckoning. Now, Trump has been facing legal challenges unlike any former president in history. Multiple indictments, civil cases, accusations that have divided the nation. Cayce's reading suggests that in 2026, these legal issues would reach a crescendo, a point where they could no longer be ignored or dismissed. According to the reading, this legal crisis would happen while the leader is in office, creating a situation never before seen in American history. Cayce described it as a test of the Republic, a moment when Americans would have to decide which principles they truly valued. He said the outcome would not be what anyone expected, that both sides would find themselves shocked by what unfolds. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds too specific. How could Cayce have known all this? And that's exactly the right question to ask. Skeptics have always questioned Cayce's methods and accuracy. But here's what makes Cayce different from other prophets and psychics. His track record is documented. His hits are undeniable. He predicted both world wars before they happened. He described the stock market crash of 1929 with eerie precision. He predicted the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls decades before they were found. He described medical treatments that didn't exist in his time, but have since been proven effective. The man had an accuracy rate that statistical analysis shows could not have been random chance. So when Cayce made specific predictions about America in the 2020s, researchers pay attention. But let's go deeper into what makes the 2026 prediction so specific. In reading 1602-3, given in 1938, Cayce was asked about the future of democracy. He said that America would face a choice in the middle of the 2020s decade, a choice between moving forward with evolved consciousness or falling backward into authoritarian patterns. He specifically mentioned the number 26 in connection with this choice point. Now, Cayce often spoke in symbolic language, but his stenographers recorded exactly what he said, and the number 26 appears multiple times in readings about America's political future. What exactly did he see happening? According to the synthesis of multiple readings, Cayce described a scenario where the controversial leader would implement policies that initially appeared successful. There would be a brief period, perhaps the first year of the return, where supporters would feel vindicated. Economic numbers might look good. certain promises might appear to be kept. But Cayce warned this was a false dawn, what he called the calm before the great storm. In 2026, according to these readings, three things would converge. The economic policies would begin to show their true cost. The international relationships that had been damaged would collapse entirely, leaving America isolated at a crucial moment, and the internal divisions would reach a breaking point, manifested in what Cayce described as unprecedented civil unrest. But here's what makes this prophecy truly shocking. Cayce didn't predict failure or success in the traditional sense. He predicted transformation through crisis. He said that what would appear to be disaster would actually be the necessary catalyst for America's evolution. He spoke of the old systems needing to die so that new ones could emerge, and he specifically said that the leader at the center of this storm was playing a role in a much larger cosmic drama, whether he knew it or not. Cayce described Trump, though not by name, as a disruptor whose purpose was to expose the cracks in the foundation. In this view, everything that happens in 2026, all the chaos and crisis, serves a higher purpose. It forces Americans to examine their values, to question their systems, to decide who they really want to be as a nation. Cayce said that by the end of 2026, America would not be the same country it was at the beginning of the year. The change would be that profound. Now let's talk about something that makes many people uncomfortable. Cayce also spoke about violence. In reading 3976-18, he described a period when the nation would come close to internal conflict, when armed factions would face each other, and when the military would be forced to make a choice about which side to support. He didn't describe this as inevitable, but as a very real possibility, depending on the choices leaders made. The trigger point, according to Cayce, would be a contested action by the leader, something seen by half the country as necessary, and by the other half as tyrannical. This action would happen in 2026, and it would push the nation to the brink. Cayce described troops in the streets of major cities, not due to foreign invasion, but due to internal breakdown. He saw this as a fork in the road moment, where America would either pull back from the edge or plunge into chaos. But here's what gives many Cayce researchers hope. In the same readings, where he describes these dark possibilities, Cayce also describes a path through. He speaks of a spiritual awakening that would emerge from the crisis, of people remembering what truly matters, of communities coming together across political divides. He says that the crisis of 2026 would ultimately serve to unite rather than divide, but only after things got much worse, before they got better. Cayce was specific about timing, within 2026. He mentioned the period between August and November as particularly critical. Now think about what happens in November of 2026. Midterm elections. According to Cayce's vision, these elections would be unlike any in American history. He described them as a referendum, not just on policies, but on the very nature of American governance. And he suggested that the results would shock everyone, that neither party would get what they expected. One of the most intriguing aspects of Cayce's predictions involves what he called the unexpected ally. He described a figure who would emerge during the crisis of 2026, someone from an unexpected place, who would offer a third path forward. This person wouldn't be a traditional politician. They would come from outside the system entirely, and according to Cayce, this figure would begin to unite people across the political spectrum by focusing on practical solutions rather than ideological battles. Could this be someone we already know? Could it be someone who hasn't emerged yet? Cayce didn't give a name, but he gave characteristics. A healer, he called them. Someone with a background in bringing people together. someone who had stayed out of politics until the crisis forced them to step in. Researchers are watching to see who might fit this description as 2026 approaches. Let's address the elephant in the room. Can prophecy be changed? Cayce believed that the future wasn't fixed. He said repeatedly that predictions showed probable outcomes based on current trajectories, but that human free will could alter the course. He emphasized that the purpose of prophecy wasn't to predict inevitable doom, but to warn people so they could make different choices. So, if Cayce's 2026 predictions are accurate based on
My prediction, and most of you will not agree with this, but Donald Trump will be the last elected president of the United States of America as we know it. The Union of 50 states is not going to stay. By the end of December 2027, this country will fall apart, and states like Florida, Texas, California, and New York after last night will declare statehood and will move away from the Union. Maybe some states will combine together with 26, 27 states and state United States of America. But otherwise, United States of America as we know it will not be there after 2027. There are just too many things going on in that country, too many differing views, conservative, left, right, Democrats. Everyone is going in different directions. There is no unifying force. And there are just too many skeletons coming out of the closets of old politicians and the new politicians. And Donald Trump is making sure the split stays there because he wants a third term somehow, somewhere. Whether it's as president of 25 states, he'll be happy to do it. But as we know it, United States of America will cease to exist by the end of 2027. Mark my words. I'm telling you, this is coming true.
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें। उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर